Imagine a bond so intense that it obliterates the rest of the world and creates a private reality where only two people exist. This is the chilling story of June and Jennifer Gibbons, who are known to the world as the Silent Twins. They were identical sisters who refused to speak to anyone but each other and created a secret universe of their own making. Their lives were a haunting mixture of creative brilliance and self-destructive madness that eventually led to a high-security institution. But the most unsettling part of their story is not their silence or their crimes, but the pact they made about death. They believed that one of them had to die so the other could truly live. This dark agreement would eventually come to pass in a way that defies medical explanation. The story begins in the early 1960s, when the Gibbons family moved from Barbados to the United Kingdom. Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons were part of the Windrush generation, seeking a better life for their growing family. June and Jennifer were born on April 11th in 1963 at a military hospital in Aden, where their father was stationed with the Royal Air Force. From the very beginning, the twins were inseparable, and their physical resemblance was uncanny. As they grew older, their parents noticed that the girls were delayed in their speech development. While other children were learning to communicate with the outside world, June and Jennifer were turning inward. They began to develop a private language that was unintelligible to their parents and siblings. By the time the family settled in Haverfordwest in Wales in 1974, the twins had effectively cut off communication with society. Haverfordwest was a quiet market town, and the Gibbons were the only black family in the community. This isolation was compounded by the fact that the twins refused to speak standard English in public. They spoke a rapid-fire version of Bajan Creole that was sped up to a point where it sounded like the chattering of birds. To the teachers and students at their school, the girls were silent statues who moved in perfect synchronization. They walked with the same gait and ate at the same pace, and mirrored every action the other performed. It was a behavior that was both fascinating and deeply disturbing to those who witnessed it. School became a torture chamber for the twins as they faced relentless bullying because of their race and their strange behavior. The other children would taunt them and push them around, but the twins never reacted or cried out. They simply stood still and endured the abuse with stone-faced expressions that unnerved their tormentors. The school administrators were baffled by their refusal to read or write in class, despite their obvious intelligence. The girls would sit at their desks with their heads down and ignoring the lessons completely. This absolute withdrawal was their defense mechanism against a world that they felt had rejected them. They retreated further into their shared identity, where they felt safe and powerful. The professionals involved in their case decided that the only way to break their silence was to separate them. In a misguided attempt to force them to socialize, the doctors advised sending June and Jennifer to different boarding schools. The result was catastrophic and terrifying. Deprived of her other half, each twin slipped into a catatonic state. They stopped moving completely and required assistance for basic bodily functions. It became clear that their bond was not just emotional, but essential for their survival. The separation caused them such immense psychological pain that they shut down entirely. The doctors had no choice but to reunite them, and the moment they were back together, they returned to their previous state of exclusive communication. Back in the safety of their bedroom, the twins created a rich and vibrant world that was invisible to outsiders. They spent their days and nights playing with dolls and creating elaborate storylines that spanned generations. They recorded these stories on a tape recorder, and their voices, which were silent in public, were loud and expressive in private. They would laugh and argue and sing and perform radio plays for an audience of two. Their bedroom became a sanctuary where they were the queens of their own high society. They lived vicariously through their characters, who were often beautiful and wealthy Americans living lives of glamour and danger. This fantasy life was their escape from the drab reality of their existence in Wales. As they entered their teenage years, their creative energy shifted from dolls to the written word. June and Jennifer became prolific writers and filled dozens of notebooks with their tiny handwriting. They took a correspondence course in creative writing and began to produce novels and poems and short stories. Their writing was surprisingly dark and mature for their age, and often featured themes of violence and crime. They were obsessed with the idea of American high society and the corrupting influence of consumer culture. One of the novels written by June was titled The Pepsi Cola Addict, and it told the story of a high school student who is seduced by a teacher and falls into a life of crime. Their literary ambitions were serious, and they pooled their unemployment benefits to self-publish their work. They sent manuscripts to major publishers in London and New York hoping to be discovered as literary prodigies. They dreamed of becoming famous authors and leaving their small-town life behind for the bright lights of the city. However, their rejection letters piled up, and their dreams of stardom began to fade. The indifference of the publishing world fueled their resentment and frustration. They felt that they had something important to say, but the world was refusing to listen. This rejection pushed them toward a more dangerous path as they sought other ways to make their mark. The twins began to crave experiences that would match the intensity of the stories they wrote. They wanted to feel the adrenaline of the characters in their books. They started to sneak out of their house at night and roam the streets of Haverfordwest. They met a group of American boys who were sons of servicemen stationed at a nearby base. For a brief period, they experimented with alcohol and drugs and sexuality. They were desperate to lose their virginity and to be seen as normal teenagers. But their inability to communicate effectively with the boys led to awkward and sometimes aggressive encounters. The boys eventually lost interest, and the twins were left feeling used and abandoned. The rejection by the boys was the final straw that pushed them over the edge into criminality. They decided that if they could not be famous for their writing, they would be notorious for their actions. They began with petty crimes such as shoplifting and vandalism. They would break into empty buildings and smash windows and leave graffiti on the walls. It was a way to lash out at the community that had ostracized them. They felt a thrill of power in these acts of destruction. They were no longer the silent victims, but the perpetrators of chaos. Their crimes escalated quickly as they sought bigger and more dangerous thrills. Their criminal spree culminated in a series of arson attacks that terrified the local community. They set fire to a tractor shop and a technical college, causing thousands of pounds in damage. The flames were a physical manifestation of their burning rage and desire to be seen. They would watch the fires burn with a mixture of excitement and detachment. They even wrote about the fires in their diaries and described the beauty of the flames and the sound of the sirens. They made no real attempt to hide their involvement, and it seemed as if they wanted to be caught. They left clues at the crime scenes and lingered nearby as the firefighters arrived. The police investigation eventually led to the Gibbons sisters, who were the prime suspects due to their strange behavior and presence near the scenes. When the police raided their bedroom, they found the diaries which contained detailed confessions of their crimes. The officers were shocked by the volume of writing and the disturbing content within the pages. The twins did not deny their actions, but they refused to speak to the officers during interrogation. They sat in silence and stared blankly at their accusers. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and they were charged with multiple counts of arson and theft. The silent twins were now front-page news. The court case was a bizarre spectacle as the two girls stood in the dock without uttering a single word. The judge and the lawyers were baffled by their refusal to defend themselves or show any remorse. The court ordered psychiatric evaluations, which revealed the depth of their complex relationship. The psychiatrists described them as having a shared psychotic disorder, where their delusions reinforced each other. The legal system did not know how to handle two young women who functioned as a single entity. In the end, the judge decided that they were a danger to society and ordered them to be detained indefinitely under the Mental Health Act. They were sent to Broadmoor Hospital, which is a high-security psychiatric hospital in England known for housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. This was a terrifying environment for two young women who had never been apart from their family. Broadmoor was filled with serial killers and rapists and violent offenders. The twins were thrust into a world of steel doors and heavy medication and constant surveillance. They were stripped of their individuality and forced to wear hospital clothing. The staff at Broadmoor struggled to manage them, as they would often freeze in place or attack nurses without warning. Life inside Broadmoor was a living nightmare for June and Jennifer. They were placed on high doses of antipsychotic medication that dulled their minds and suppressed their creativity. The drugs made it impossible for them to write or concentrate, which was the one thing that had given their lives meaning. They described the medication as a chemical lobotomy that stole their souls. Their diaries from this period are filled with despair and longing for freedom. They felt like they were rotting away in a concrete tomb. The vibrant inner world they had created was slowly being suffocated by the harsh reality of the institution. Despite the heavy medication, the bond between the twins remained as strong as ever. They continued to communicate in their secret language and coordinate their movements. However, the dynamic between them began to shift in a disturbing way. Their diaries revealed a love-hate relationship that was becoming increasingly toxic. June wrote about her fear of Jennifer and described her sister as a dark shadow that was consuming her light. Jennifer wrote about her jealousy of June and her desire to possess her completely. They were locked in a psychological battle for dominance where neither could win. During their time in Broadmoor, they were visited by the journalist Marjorie Wallace, who took a keen interest in their case. Wallace was the first person to truly gain their trust and look beyond the label of the silent twins. She spent hours interviewing them and reading their diaries and trying to understand their world. Through her investigation, she uncovered the depth of their suffering and the tragedy of their situation. She became their advocate and fought for their release or transfer to a more humane facility. Wallace realized that Broadmoor was destroying them and that they needed help rather than punishment. As the years dragged on, the twins came to a chilling realization about their future. They believed that they could never be free as long as they were both alive. They developed the belief that one of them had to die in order for the other to live a normal life. This was not a suicidal impulse in the traditional sense, but a sacrificial pact. They discussed it calmly and rationally, as if it were the only logical solution to their problem. They believed that the spirit of the deceased twin would empower the survivor and give them the strength to speak. The decision was made that Jennifer would be the one to die. She told Marjorie Wallace that she had decided to make the ultimate sacrifice for her sister. Jennifer was the dominant twin, but she also felt a sense of responsibility for their situation. She believed that her death was the only key that would unlock June's silence. It is a terrifying thought that two young women could come to such a fatalistic conclusion. They waited for the right moment to execute their plan, which they believed would be their release from Broadmoor. The pact was sealed in their hearts and minds. In March of 1993, after 11 years of confinement, the twins were finally granted a transfer to a lower security clinic in Wales. This should have been a moment of celebration and hope for a new beginning. However, Jennifer seemed to know that this was the end of her journey. On the morning of the transfer, she packed her bag slowly and said her goodbyes to the staff. She reportedly told her doctor that she was going to die that day. The staff dismissed her comment as anxiety about the move, but Jennifer was deadly serious. The journey to the Caswell Clinic was a short bus ride, but it would change everything forever. As the bus made its way through the countryside, Jennifer rested her head on June's shoulder. She began to drift in and out of consciousness, and her breathing became shallow. June held her sister and watched as the life drained from her eyes. By the time they arrived at the clinic, Jennifer was unresponsive. The medical staff rushed her inside and tried to revive her, but it was too late. Jennifer Gibbons was pronounced dead at the age of 29. The autopsy results deepened the mystery rather than solving it. The pathologists found that Jennifer had died of acute myocarditis, which is a sudden inflammation of the heart. There were no drugs or poisons in her system, and no signs of violence or foul play. Her heart had simply stopped beating for no apparent medical reason. It was as if she had willed her own heart to stop in accordance with their pact. The doctors were baffled and could not explain how a healthy young woman could die so suddenly without a cause. June was devastated by the loss of her sister, but she also felt a strange sense of release. In the days following Jennifer's death, June began to speak to the staff and to Marjorie Wallace. She spoke clearly and without the speech impediment that had plagued her childhood. She told Wallace that she was free at last and that Jennifer had given her life for her. The liberation that they had predicted had come true, but at a terrible cost. June was now alone in the world for the first time in her life. The aftermath of the case raised many questions about the nature of the twin bond and the power of the human mind. How could a psychological pact result in a physical death? Was it possible that Jennifer's stress and belief in her own demise caused her heart to fail? Some have suggested that the medication they were on may have weakened her heart over time, but the suddenness of the event remains unexplained. The case challenges our understanding of the connection between the mind and the body. It suggests that the will to die can be as powerful as the will to live. June Gibbons was eventually released from the clinic and began to build a life for herself in the community. She moved back to her hometown and lived quietly near her parents. She gave interviews where she spoke about her sister with a mixture of love and sadness. She described the feeling of Jennifer's presence with her and how she still felt guided by her spirit. June never returned to the intense fantasy writing of her youth, but she lived a life of relative normalcy. She had fulfilled the prophecy that one would live. The story of the silent twins has left a lasting legacy in the world of psychology and true crime. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of isolation and the failure of the system to understand complex mental health issues. The treatment of the twins in Broadmoor is now seen by many as cruel and unnecessary. They were not hardened criminals, but troubled young women who needed therapy and understanding. Their story highlights the need for better care for those who do not fit into the standard boxes of society. Marjorie Wallace wrote a book titled The Silent Twins, which brought their story to a global audience. The book provided a window into their secret world and preserved their voices for posterity. It remains the definitive account of their lives and is a haunting tribute to their bond. The book was later adapted into a film, which further cemented their place in popular culture. The image of the two girls standing side by side in silence has become an iconic symbol of twin mystique. The diaries of June and Jennifer remain one of the most fascinating aspects of the case. They offer a raw and unfiltered look into the minds of two people who were completely cut off from the world. The writing is poetic and disturbing and deeply human. It reveals their intelligence and their humor and their profound loneliness. These notebooks are a testament to their creative spirit, which survived even in the darkest of circumstances. They are a legacy of a high society of the mind that they built together. One of the most unsettling questions that lingers is what would have happened if they had not been sent to Broadmoor. Could they have been helped earlier? Could their creativity have been channeled into something positive? It is a tragedy of missed opportunities and systemic failures. The twins were failed by their school and by the medical professionals and by the legal system. They were treated as monsters rather than as human beings in distress. This failure ultimately led to the death of one and the permanent scarring of the other. The case also forces us to confront the power of language and communication. The twins prove that language is not just a tool for information, but a way of defining reality. By creating their own language, they created their own world. When they refused to speak to others, they were rejecting the reality that was offered to them. Their silence was a form of protest and a way of asserting control over their lives. It was a powerful weapon that they used against a world that did not understand them. The death of Jennifer Gibbons remains one of the most singular events in forensic history. The idea of a psychogenic death is controversial, but difficult to dismiss in this case. The timing of her death coinciding exactly with their transfer, and their pact is too precise to be a coincidence. It suggests that the human mind has capabilities that we do not yet understand. It is a reminder that there are still mysteries in this world that science cannot fully explain. Today, the grave of Jennifer Gibbons in Haverfordwest is a place of pilgrimage for those who are moved by their story. The headstone is engraved with a poem written by June, which speaks of their eternal bond. It is a somber reminder of the girl who gave up her life for her sister. The cemetery is quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic and noisy life they lived in Broadmoor. It is the final resting place of one half of a whole that was torn apart. June lives on carrying the memory of her sister and the burden of their past. She is a survivor of a unique and terrifying journey. She has managed to find a place in the world that once rejected her. Her ability to speak and to connect with others is a victory over the silence that once imprisoned her. But one can only imagine the silence that still exists in her heart, where her sister used to be. The silent twins case serves as a dark mirror to our own society. It reflects our fear of the unknown and our tendency to punish what we do not understand. It challenges us to look closer at those who are on the margins and to listen to the silence. It asks us to consider the depth of the human need for connection and the terrible price of isolation. The story of June and Jennifer is a tragedy, but it is also a story of a love so powerful that it transcended life and death. As we reflect on this unsettling high society case of the mind, we are left with more questions than answers. The mystery of the silent twins will likely never be fully solved. It stands as a testament to the complexity of the human psyche and the unbreakable bond of sisterhood. In the end, they were two girls who wanted to be heard, but chose silence as their loudest scream. Their story will continue to haunt and fascinate generations to come.